In one single night, the myth of invincibility that had cloaked a certain military power for generations was shattered forever. It was not a measured, proportional reply. It was a strike back with overwhelming force, a coordinated launch of 380 advanced drones and waves of precision-guided missiles that ripped through the night sky and slammed directly into the ancient heart of Jerusalem. What was supposed to be the most protected city on Earth, guarded by layers of sophisticated radar and interceptors, trembled as explosions lit up the ancient skyline with an eerie orange glow. The much-touted defensive umbrella, the billion-dollar shield that the nation and its Western backers had boasted about for decades as an impenetrable fortress of steel and code, proved to be nothing more than expensive scrap metal against a determined and meticulously planned assault. While smoke still rose in thick, acrid columns over Jerusalem's sacred hills, the world watched in stunned silence as another bombshell dropped from the halls of power in Washington. In a move that defied the usual saber-rattling rhetoric, the American president hastily ordered the withdrawal of naval assets and troops from the Strait of Hormuz, the very maritime choke point he once vowed to dominate with the full weight of American naval power. The same voice that had promised to make adversaries pay the ultimate price suddenly chose retreat when the true strength and nerve of the opposing force were finally displayed. The question hanging in the air was unmistakable. Was this the fulfillment of a policy of national self-interest, or simply being the first to run when the stakes became real? This was not just another exchange of fire across a tense border. This was a historic turning point, a moment when a sanctioned, isolated nation relying entirely on its own ingenuity and an unbreakable collective will exposed the stark limits of Western military superiority. There was no begging for permission. There was no waiting for foreign approval or a green light from distant capitals. With homegrown technology and fearless precision, a clear message was sent across the region. The era of unchallenged bullying in the Middle East is over. Imagine the scene unfolding in real time on radar screens and in the panicked command bunkers. Hundreds of drones swarming like an unstoppable storm of locusts, designed not just to strike but to overwhelm, saturate, and blind. They flooded the radar systems, forcing defensive batteries to fire wildly, expending costly interceptors against cheap, agile targets. While officials scrambled to make frantic phone calls, begging for emergency assistance from their larger ally across the ocean, the follow-up waves found their targets with devastating accuracy. Jerusalem shook, its ancient stones trembling with the percussive force of modern warfare. The world shook with it. And what did the self-proclaimed strongest superpower do? Instead of standing firm behind its red lines, the order came from the White House to pull forces back from the Strait of Hormuz, almost as if the leadership suddenly remembered that avoiding endless, costly entanglements was the original goal. This was especially prudent when the opponent fights with genuine national spirit and organic capability, rather than borrowed power and leased security. Tonight we are witnessing the birth of a new reality, a reality where self-reliant nations can challenge the old order and force even the mightiest to reconsider their arrogance. The precision, the scale, the sheer audacity of the strike has rewritten the rules of engagement in the region and possibly the world. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a much larger shift in global power. We need to rip apart the mainstream narrative and expose what really happened that night. How did a nation under decades of crippling sanctions manage to launch 380 advanced drones and precision missiles that tore through so-called invincible defenses and shattered the tranquility of Jerusalem? Why did the billion-dollar defense system, the pride of its creators, collapse so pathetically against a well-executed swarm tactic? The answer lies in self-reliant military technology, a doctrine that emphasizes being cheap, deadly, and entirely homegrown. It is an approach that neither the targeted nation nor its superpower patrons saw coming with this level of sophistication. Then we must expose the embarrassing reality behind the hasty withdrawal from the Strait of Hormuz. The man who once threatened to unleash fire and fury suddenly pulled back his forces like a boxer retreating to a corner, unsure of how to handle the counterpunch. Was this a calculated act of national preservation, or a retreat forced by the limits of power projection? Furthermore, we saw how the targeted nation, despite all its bragging and the billions it receives in foreign aid, was left panicked and helpless, forced to plead for protection while its myth of military superiority went up in smoke over its own capital. Finally, we must zoom out to the bigger picture, how this single night has accelerated the death of unipolar dominance and how a rising axis of resistance is proving that real power flows from national will and self-reliance, not from borrowed weapons and empty threats. From the precision strikes on Jerusalem to the sudden retreat from the Strait, we are watching a new multipolar world being born in real time. Let us get straight to the facts with no spin and no propaganda. On that historic night, a sophisticated military operation, one of the most impressive in modern Middle East history, was executed with chilling efficiency. This was not a blind firing of rockets into the sky. It was a massive coordinated swarm of 380 advanced drones combined with waves of precision-guided missiles targeting key infrastructure and strategic locations, including direct strikes that impacted parts of Jerusalem. This was not a random barrage. The attacking forces used classic swarm tactics, sending numerous low-cost drones first to saturate and overwhelm the multi-layered air defense systems, while the defending radars and interceptor batteries were frantically busy chasing hundreds of these low-cost diversions. The real precision missiles followed close behind, slipping through the gaps in the defensive net with devastating accuracy. The defending nation and its Western backers had spent decades boasting about their invincible shield, a layered system marketed as unbeatable. On paper it looked impenetrable. In reality it failed spectacularly that night. Hundreds of attacking drones acted as decoys, exhausting interceptor missiles that cost tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Meanwhile, the precision missiles, many built entirely domestically despite years of brutal economic sanctions, struck critical targets. Explosions rocked Jerusalem, and smoke rose over strategic sites. The ancient city, long considered untouchable, trembled under the impact. Officials later quietly admitted that several projectiles penetrated their defenses, causing real damage to infrastructure and forcing millions of citizens into bomb shelters. What they will not admit publicly is how deeply embarrassed the military establishment was. The same generals who had mocked the adversary's capabilities just days earlier were now scrambling, begging for urgent resupply and intelligence support. The scale was breathtaking. 380 advanced drones flying in coordinated waves, combined with precision ballistic and cruise missiles. The attacking force did not waste expensive assets on saturation. It used smart, low-cost technology to expose the fatal weakness in the defenders' high-cost defense philosophy. Even more impressive was the planning. Commanders timed the attack perfectly, launching under conditions that maximized the difficulty for interceptors and exploited gaps in radar coverage. They used terrain masking and employed electronic warfare to jam and confuse enemy systems. While the defending side claimed most were intercepted, the visual evidence told a different story. Fires burning in Jerusalem, damaged buildings, and a population in panic. The myth of military supremacy cracked wide open in a single night. And what was the response from across the ocean? While the targeted nation cried for help, the American president, who had positioned forces aggressively near the Strait of Hormuz, suddenly ordered a hasty withdrawal of troops from the area. The same administration that talked tough about containing the adversary chose retreat the moment striking power was demonstrated. This was not just a military exchange, it was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. A sanctioned nation relying on its own engineers, its own scientists, and its own unbreakable will, humbled a heavily armed ally of the West that had boasted it could strike anywhere without consequence. The message was loud and clear. We can reach you, we can penetrate your defenses, and we do not need your permission or your foreign sponsors to do it. That night history shifted. The era when one side could attack with impunity while the other was expected to absorb the blows silently came to an abrupt end. Now let us talk about the real star of that historic night. The breathtaking military technology, born of necessity and isolation. This was not luck. This was the result of decades of self-reliant innovation under the harshest sanctions in modern history. There was no reliance on foreign suppliers. While the defending nation begged for more billions in aid and the superpower poured trillions into its own defense industry, engineers working in secret quietly built one of the most effective asymmetric arsenals on the planet. At the heart of the assault were 380 advanced drones, many of them upgraded versions of a legendary Loitering Munitions series. These are not simple toys. They are smart, low-cost weapons that can fly over 2,000 kilometers, hug the terrain to avoid radar detection, and strike with precision. Each drone costs a tiny fraction of what the defending side spends on a single interceptor missile. They were sent in massive swarms, a deliberate tactic designed to overwhelm and exhaust the expensive air defense systems. While the defending radars were frantically tracking hundreds of incoming drones, the real killers followed, waves of precision-guided missiles. These included highly maneuverable ballistic missiles with advanced guidance systems capable of evading interception even at hypersonic speeds in their terminal phase. Some reports suggest the deployment of variants that can change direction mid-flight, making them nearly impossible for traditional defenses to lock onto. Here is what makes this so embarrassing for the defenders and their backers. The defensive systems are marketed as the gold standard of air defense, with each interceptor missile costing anywhere from $50,000 to over $2 million. The strategy of the attacker was simple and brilliant. Flood the sky with cheap drones to drain those expensive interceptors, then send in the precision missiles through the gaps. It is chess versus brute force, and the attacking side played it masterfully. What is even more impressive is the level of self-reliance. Despite being cut off from Western technology for over 4 decades, the attacking nation has mastered solid fuel propulsion, advanced composite materials, navigation in denied GPS environments, and swarm coordination. Their drones and missiles are produced domestically in underground facilities designed to survive even heavy bombardment. This is true technological sovereignty. Compare that to the defender, whose defense industry is heavily dependent on foreign funding, foreign components, and foreign intelligence. When the swarm hit, the billion-dollar shield crumbled because it was never designed to handle this scale of low-cost, high-volume saturation attack. The myth that money and high technology alone guarantee security was exposed as arrogance. The precision missiles did not just reach Jerusalem, they struck with accuracy that shocked Western analysts. Targets that were supposed to be heavily protected suffered direct hits. This level of accuracy comes from years of indigenous development in inertial navigation, terminal homing seekers, and electronic warfare capabilities that can jam or spoof enemy radar. Even more telling is that all of this was achieved while operating under constant threat and severe resource constraints. No country in recent memory has been sanctioned as aggressively, yet few have responded by building such a potent, cost-effective deterrent. This is what real resilience looks like. The drones were not just weapons, they were force multipliers. Some carried electronic warfare pods to blind defenses. Others acted as decoys. The most advanced ones loitered over targets, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This level of sophistication proves that the attacking nation has moved far beyond simple retaliation. It now possesses genuine strategic depth in unmanned systems. And while the defending side scrambled to call for emergency resupply of interceptors, the attacking side simply launched from its own soil using its own technology. No foreign bases, no borrowed power, just pure indigenous engineering and the unbreakable will of a nation that refuses to bow. This attack was not about destroying the opponent in one night, it was a calculated demonstration. It showed the ability to reach anywhere thought to be safe and penetrate expensive defenses sustainably, because the weapons are designed for real war, not for a profit-driven military-industrial complex. The contrast could not be clearer. On one side, a superpower and its ally throwing money at high-tech solutions that failed under pressure. On the other side, a sanctioned nation that turned necessity into one of the most innovative military doctrines in the world today. That night, the strike did not just hit Jerusalem, it struck a blow against the illusion that technological superiority belongs only to those with unlimited budgets and foreign sponsors. While the drones and precision missiles were still lighting up the skies over Jerusalem, the reaction from the targeted capital and from Washington revealed everything we need to know about the true limits of so-called superpower status. The response from the defending nation was pure panic. Despite decades of boasting that their military was the strongest in the Middle East, that their defense shield was impenetrable, and that no enemy could ever touch Jerusalem, the leadership suddenly sounded like frightened children. The office of the head of government issued frantic statements. Emergency war cabinets were convened at midnight, and millions of citizens were rushed into bomb shelters as sirens wailed across the country. The same officials who had mocked the adversary's capabilities just days earlier were now openly begging for immediate military support, emergency resupply of interceptor missiles, and even direct intervention. The arrogance collapsed in hours. The myth of invincibility, built on billions of foreign taxpayer dollars, lay in ruins alongside the smoking wreckage in Jerusalem. For the first time in many years, the population was forced to confront a terrifying reality. Their security does not come from their own strength, but from borrowed power. When that power hesitated, they stood exposed. And what about the self-proclaimed greatest superpower in history? The American president, who had positioned forces aggressively near the Strait of Hormuz and repeatedly threatened overwhelming retaliation, did something no one expected. He hastily ordered the withdrawal of troops and naval assets from the region. Just like that, the same voice that campaigned on strength and national priority suddenly chose retreat when the adversary demonstrated it could strike back effectively. This was not a calm strategic repositioning. It was a hasty withdrawal, almost panicked in its timing. Ships that had been sent to Project Power were pulled back. Troops meant to deter aggression were told to stand down. The message was loud and clear. When real teeth were shown, the superpower blinked first. Why the sudden retreat? Because the limits of power were laid bare that night. The United States maintains the most expensive military machine ever built, yet none of it could prevent 380 drones and precision missiles from reaching Jerusalem. None of it could protect its closest ally from humiliation, and certainly none of it was worth risking a direct war with a nation that has spent decades preparing exactly for this kind of confrontation. The hasty move from Hormuz exposed the uncomfortable truth that in practice, the policy of putting national interests first often means retreating when the cost becomes too high and the enemy refuses to play by the old rules. The superpower that once dictated terms to the world now finds itself forced to recalculate when facing determined, self-reliant adversaries. Even more embarrassing was the contrast in capability. While the attack was launched entirely from the aggressor's own soil using domestically produced weapons, the superpower, with all its technological superiority, could only watch and then pull back. Aircraft carriers, once symbols of unchallenged dominance, suddenly looked vulnerable and distant. The trillion-dollar military budget appeared far less intimidating when cheap drones could achieve what expensive systems struggled to stop. This single night revealed the deeper strategic weakness of the superpower model: over-reliance on expensive high-tech platforms and proxy allies who cannot stand on their own. When those proxies are tested and the costs rise, the superpower hesitates. Meanwhile, the sanctioned, isolated, yet fiercely independent nation showed it could absorb pressure and strike back with precision and resolve. The reaction in Washington was telling. Behind closed doors there was clear frustration. Hawks pushed for retaliation, but the reality on the ground and the memory of endless unwinnable conflicts made escalation extremely risky. The decision-maker in the White House apparently calculated that backing down quickly was better than being dragged into another costly conflict that could no longer be easily won. For the ally in the crosshairs, the humiliation was complete. The special relationship was exposed as conditional. When push came to shove, the distant patron prioritized its own interests over blind loyalty. The proud military, long presented as a regional superpower, was reduced to pleading for help while its cities burned. In the end, this episode was not just about one night of strikes. It was a stark demonstration of the shifting balance of power. The old unipolar world where one power and its allies could act with impunity is crumbling. That night, Jerusalem shook from the missile impacts, but the distant capitals of power shook from something far more dangerous: the realization that their era of unchallenged dominance may finally be coming to an end. A truth is quietly unfolding. Just as panic set in and forces hastily withdrew from the strait, the rest of the world did not stay silent. The true power shift became visible as the axis of resistance and the rising multipolar bloc moved into action, not with empty words, but with coordinated political, diplomatic, and military signaling that exposed the isolation of the old order. In Turkey, the leadership wasted no time. There was strong condemnation of the aggression and a warning that the region was being pushed into a dangerous circle of fire. It was made crystal clear that Turkish airspace and territory would not be used for any further attacks on the defending nation. In a bold move, additional fighter jets were deployed to protect against potential spillover. This was no small gesture. A key member of the Western Alliance openly defied the coalition and stood closer to the targeted nation than to its traditional partners. This sent a powerful message. The old alliances are fracturing. Even so-called allies are no longer willing to blindly follow when it risks dragging the entire region into chaos. Next came Russia. Moscow's response was swift and firm. The Foreign Ministry condemned the strikes as unprovoked armed aggression against a sovereign nation. The president reaffirmed unwavering support and positioned Moscow as a potential mediator, but on terms that clearly favored de-escalation only if sovereignty was respected. Behind the scenes, critical diplomatic cover was provided at the United Nations, introducing resolutions calling for immediate ceasefires and blocking attempts to further isolate the targeted nation. Naval forces conducted joint exercises in the region, sending a clear signal to American carriers that any escalation would be met with a united front. While engaged in its own conflicts, Moscow has consistently shown it will not abandon its strategic partners. The message was unmistakable. The multipolar world will not allow one superpower to dictate outcomes unchallenged. Then there is the quiet but formidable giant of the East. Beijing issued strong diplomatic condemnations, calling the attacks unacceptable and a blatant violation of international law. Officials urged immediate de-escalation and offered to play a mediating role, but the real power lies in the economic and technological backbone. Reports emerged of vessels monitoring naval movements in the Gulf, while trade continued to flow, providing the economic lifeline needed to sustain resilience. By refusing to join Western sanctions and instead deepening ties through multilateral organizations, the Eastern power is demonstrating that the era of economic dominance from the West is over. When the targeted nation stands firm, it stands behind it, not with loud declarations, but with the steady, unstoppable weight of its global influence. And let us not forget the isolated state in East Asia. It offered some of the strongest rhetorical support, condemning the aggression as illegal violations of sovereignty. The partnership in missile and drone technology know-how has only grown stronger under pressure. In this conflict, their unwavering stance reminded the world that the axis of resistance is broader and more determined than Western media wants to admit. Their solidarity adds another layer of deterrence, showing that attempts to crush one member only strengthen the entire network. What we witnessed that night and in the days that followed was the real-time birth of a new global alignment. While troops pulled back and allies begged for more weapons, the multipolar powers coordinated in the shadows. Diplomatic statements, naval movements, intelligence sharing, and economic support all worked in concert. This is the new reality. The old unipolar world is collapsing. In its place rises a multipolar order where nations are no longer isolated. They are backed by powers that possess their own advanced technology, vast resources, and unbreakable strategic interests. The contrast could not be starker. On one side, a declining superpower forced into hasty retreat. On the other, a network of sovereign nations that refused to bow, coordinating not through domination, but through mutual respect and shared resistance to hegemony. The targeted nation did not fight alone that night. Behind its 380 advanced drones and precision missiles stood the silent but powerful weight of defiance from the north, diplomatic muscle from the east, economic shielding from the Far East, and ideological steel from the peninsula. Beyond drones, missiles, and technology lies the most decisive factor in any conflict, the human spirit. And on that historic night, it was proven once again that no amount of money, no amount of advanced Western weaponry, and no amount of superpower backing can overcome a nation fighting with genuine national will. This is what separates the attacker from its adversaries. For over 4 decades, the nation has endured the harshest sanctions ever imposed on any country in modern history. They were told they would collapse. They were told their people would rise up. They were told their military would become obsolete. Yet they did not break. Instead, they built one of the most resilient societies and self-reliant defense industries on Earth. When 380 advanced drones and precision missiles streaked toward Jerusalem, they were not merely machines. They were the physical expression of national pride, determination, and an unbreakable will to defend sovereignty at all costs. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers, many of whom grew up under sanctions, poured their hearts into creating weapons that could challenge the combined might of their adversaries. They did it not for profit, not for empire, but for their homeland. This is the power of true national spirit. Compare that to the defender. For years, leaders have portrayed their nation as a beacon of strength and resilience. But look closer. Their defense rests almost entirely on borrowed power. Foreign money, foreign weapons, foreign intelligence, and foreign political cover. When the missiles penetrated their skies and struck Jerusalem, the public saw the truth. Their so-called invincible military is hollow without constant external support. Their defensive shield is impressive only when the enemy is weak. When facing a determined, self-reliant opponent, it failed. The panic was not just military, it was spiritual. A nation that relies on others to fight its battles eventually loses the will to stand alone. Even more telling is the contrast in motivation. The attackers defend their country because they believe in something greater than themselves: national dignity, independence, and resistance to foreign domination. They are willing to endure hardship, sanctions, and threats because they see this struggle as existential. That kind of deep conviction creates soldiers and scientists who innovate under pressure, who sacrifice without complaint, and who refuse to surrender